Humans have a love-hate relationship with change. We need it for growth and variety, and yet we hate the upheaval it brings into our lives. Resilience seems to be the answer. So let's explore a new kind of conversation where we look at the turbulence of change and the resilience that enables us to not only survive it, but to truly thrive from it. I'm Paula Shaw, life transition expert, grief counseling specialist, and author. I'll be spotlighting influential people on this podcast, people who have taken the steps to change it up. So join us as we share valuable information to help you navigate the rocky waters of change. Come on, jump on in. Hey, welcome to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and I'm so glad you're going to be with me today because we're going to be talking about something that I feel is incredibly important. In fact, so important that I wrote a whole book about it called Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say. And I'm going to tell you why I wrote that book. Because after 28 years of working with hurting, grieving people, I can't tell you how many times I heard them say, no one called. No one said anything. I went to work and no one even brought it up. They all knew I suffered this loss, but no one said anything. And guess what that does to the grieving person? It leaves them out there alone, in pain and alone. And none of us want to do that to someone that we care about who's hurting. But the problem is, it can be so uncomfortable for us. It can be so difficult to know what to say to somebody who's just gone through some unspeakable tragedy or had a breakup in a relationship or a death or a job loss, something that turns your world upside down for one reason or another can be devastating. And yet, we humans have a hard time feeling very comfortable about knowing what to say. And today, what I really want to explore with you is looking at the cultural, societal, personal, and genetic experiences that impact how we communicate, whether we're blocked toward effective communication or whether we can step into it smoothly. But remember, when there's emotion involved, we're really coming from heart rather than head and intellect. And we're so much more comfortable coming from our heads because that's how our society has acculturated us. That's what we've learned is kind of the right way to go. And so when we can't find an intellectual answer for an emotional issue, we're really left flailing, feeling helpless, and not knowing how to handle it, and not knowing how to help our friends who are going through that change and that loss. So let's remember how the progression works, because we talk about this in our intro every week. Change, which is going to happen whether we like it or not, change equals loss and upheaval. Because when things are different, then whatever was familiar has been lost. And now there's some chaos. Now there's some upheaval in our lives. And that doesn't make us feel very comfortable. And loss and upheaval create that discomfort and pain that we refer to as grief. And that's why humans have this love-hate relationship with change. We need it. We need things to be different. We need to experience new things to keep life interesting, to give us variety, and to help us grow. But New things are not familiar, and familiar is what's comfortable. And so when we're dealing with the unfamiliar, we we get uncomfortable, and we get in a place where we just don't know what to do or what to say, and that doesn't feel good. And so, what so often happens is we have every intention of calling that person who's hurting or going over and paying a little visit to them. But then this comes up and that comes up. And before we know it, another day has gone by and we haven't made that call or we haven't made that visit. And the real underlying reason that we haven't is because we don't know what to say or what to do that would be helpful and effective. And we certainly don't want to make their circumstance worse. And so, what we're going to be doing in this two-part series this week and next week is looking first at what are the reasons we're not better at this? Why are we so scared? We're going to look at all of that. And then next week, I'm going to get into how can you become a more effective communicator with someone who's hurting? Because we all know people who are hurting. We all just went through a pandemic. We know people who lost money, who lost jobs, who lost security, who lost loved ones. There's a lot of loss out there. There's upheaval going on in the world right now that's causing grief. And never before has there been a time when our skills are needed more. Our skills of being able to support, comfort, and love our friends and our family in pain. So I'm glad you're here today because this is important stuff. It's really important that we all have those skills, and it's not that difficult. It really isn't. In fact, it comes down to some really simple stuff. But before we get into what can you do that's helpful, what are the good things that you want to do that are actually supportive and helpful and even healing? Before we get into what those are, let's explore a little bit. What are the problems? What are the reasons and the blocks that we don't all just do this naturally? Because we're all humans. We all have feelings. We've all cried. We've all been through pain. And we've had friends and family who have been through the same. And ideally, when someone is feeling weak or vulnerable, the others of us would support them, would help them feel stronger and bring to them the conversations and the actions that would help them feel better and help them heal. But when we don't feel confident about that, as I said in the beginning of our show, we don't show up. We just don't. And guess what? While we're not showing up, we're not feeling good about that either. We're feeling guilty. We're feeling like a terrible friend. We're feeling like we aren't doing what we should be doing to support that person who's in pain. So let's see if we can work together today and next week and build those skills so that the next time someone comes into your experience who's hurting and who needs a friend, you can be that person. You can be that support. Actually, one of the most exciting things that happened to me when I first released my book, Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say, I had one person say to me, it's a small book. So she was able to read it in one sitting. And she had, in fact, ordered it from Amazon and just gotten it that day. And at the end of her day in the office, things were a little lighter. So she had time to get into the book. And she was really enjoying it. She ended up reading the whole thing. And she said she drove home. And when she got home, her neighbor was wandering in her front yard in a totally stricken state. and had just found out that her daughter had been killed in a terrible accident. And what my friend said to me was, normally I would have just been agonizing with pain of my own and fears and insecurity about how to help her because she was in such a serious state. She said, but instead, I got out of the car confidently and felt like I knew what to do. And that's my dream. That's my dream and why I wrote that book. I want every one of you to just be able to step into the conversation confidently, knowing that you know exactly the kinds of things that would be helpful and the kinds of things to say that you would not want to say because they are not helpful. So let's look first at some of the reasons why it's so hard for us to know the right things to say and to feel that we are inadequate when it comes to these conversations. So, point number one, we all come into a situation with our unique life experiences, with the uniqueness about how we were raised, what we experienced, and what we think about life and behavior and all these different things. So, all those unique beliefs and behaviors may not be an easy match with what the person you're trying to help is expressing, what they're feeling. So let's look at some of the things that create differences, these unique things that we all experience. So, one is family values and expectations. So, let me give you an example of that. Let's say your family was either from a Germanic country or even England, where people have a little bit more of a less emotionally expressive way of feeling is correct. We might call it that stiff upper lip sort of thing, where the Brits try and keep that strength, that I'm fine face on no matter what's happening. Where maybe if the other person involved in this little scenario we're looking at, perhaps they were Italian or Mediterranean, or a culture where people are more expressive, where they talk with their hands and they have a lot more vocal intonation. So if you're that more quiet style person who has been taught in your upbringing that it's more correct or more proper to be conservative in your expression, and now you're dealing with somebody who may be wailing or screaming or wanting to punch holes in walls, it can be very difficult to know what to say, to know how to be effective, and to not come across as judgmental of how the other person is behaving. But at the same time, there's got to be a level of discomfort because this is not how you were taught is the right way to do it. So you see what I'm saying here? We all have our ideas that we were taught in our upbringing about what's the right way to do anything, right? And so grieving, expressing, being emotional, we have thoughts about what is the right way to handle that. So when you come into that interaction with somebody who's very different from you, there can be problems. Another thing that you might want to look at is what experiences that particular family has had. What experiences have you had in your family? And what experiences does the grieving person have in their family? So let me give you an example of that. In my family, one of the most really painful things we all had to go through was the suicide of my cousin. And when suicide happens, it's such a painful thing because every single person second guesses what they were doing at that time, or if there's any way they could have helped, or what if. There's a lot of what if kind of thoughts. What if I'd have called? What if I'd gotten there sooner? What if I'd have been thinking of him and just, even just got in my car and been there instead? There's a lot of that. What if? What if I hadn't said this? What if this hadn't happened? That kind of thing. So for me, that past trauma, had I not healed it in myself, would make it very difficult for me to try to help the family of someone who had just committed suicide. So the family experiences, will really impact how effective we are in certain situations. If you grew up in a family where there wasn't much um, communication over meals, let's say, or not a lot of openness, talking about what we were feeling, what we were experiencing, some embarrassing thing that happened that day. If you came from a family that everybody was really busy and it was all kind of disconnected, it might be very hard for you to know what to say to somebody who just puts it out there, who just says everything they're feeling and experiencing. So I hope you're starting to get what I'm talking about here in terms of our differences creating situations that can make it more difficult and more uncomfortable to step in and help that person you care about who's hurting. So we will look at some more aspects of this when we come back from this short break. We'll be right back.
Is living in today's fast-paced world making you feel stressed and out of balance? Are anxiety, sleeplessness, depression, lack of focus, or weight gain robbing you of your relationship and your energy? If you're ready for change, you need to call Paula Shaw. Paula helps you identify and eliminate self-sabotaging thinking and behavior. Using a wide variety of mind-body techniques, she provides her clients with the most effective processes for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and we're talking today about saying the right thing when you don't know what to say. And I mentioned in the first segment that I wrote the book of that very same title because I'd just seen too many hurting, grieving people who got left alone. No one showed up. No one called. And I know it wasn't because they didn't have anyone in their life that didn't care. It was because those people just were so uncomfortable and so afraid that they might say the wrong thing and make things worse. We're all a little bit uncomfortable with fragile, hurting people. We don't want to break them. We don't want to make it worse. And so a million reasons can come up why we just couldn't get there or couldn't make that call. Because the truth is, at the core of it, we're afraid. We're just afraid that whatever we do will be the wrong thing and will make it worse. So we are now looking at some of the things in our experiences that create that fear, that underlying fear that stops us from supporting the people we love. So another, excuse me, another very important area can be societal norms. So let's say you're from the US and the person in your life who's hurting is from a country in Africa where people look at things very differently when there's a death. They have different kinds of traditions. Here in the US, there was a time, and in Europe for sure, where not only did people wear black for a year after they lost someone they loved, they wore an armband. And that armband signified to everybody, I am grieving. I am in pain. I have suffered a loss. And I personally think that's a great idea. I wish we still did it because then everybody's got a heads up. Everybody around you, everybody who comes into your sphere knows that something's happened that you're hurting about. So it would be very natural to say something like, I see you're wearing an armband. Was it a death? That could open up a helpful conversation. Or what kind of a loss did you suffer? But if there's no armband there and there's no particular entree to that conversation, then you might just not have it, especially because many of us are misinformed. And we think that when we're around someone who's just suffered a loss, whether it's a job loss, a relationship loss, a death, whatever it is, we think our job is to just cheer them up, not bring up the thing that they're sad about or hurting about. But guys, it's just the opposite. It's the elephant in the middle of the living room. If you don't acknowledge it, if you don't talk about it, then you really put this person in an uncomfortable position. I'll tell you a little story from my own life. I had a best friend, and I mean, we were tight. We were best friends, and she got pregnant and she lost the pregnancy around 2 or 3 months in, and she was devastated. And I, at that time, was not a trained grief therapist. I, like most people, thought my job was to invite her to do fun things, to take her out for a drink, to, go to a movie with her, whatever we would think of to do. And one day, like a month into this behavior, she said to me, "Wow, I went back to work today and it was so weird." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Not one person brought up that I'd lost my baby." And I thought to myself in that moment, oh my God, neither have I. And I realized, and I said to her, "Well, what did you do? Did you bring it up?" And she said, "No, I didn't want to be the buzzkill for them. I didn't want to be a downer for everybody else. So here is my friend hurting because she's had this devastating experience. And I didn't bring it up, nor did anyone else. So she was worrying about us. She was worrying about not expressing her pain because she didn't want to be a downer for everyone else." We can't do that, guys. We can't leave the hurting people alone out there trying to figure it out for themselves. That's why we're having this talk today. That's why we're on this topic. So let's get back to looking at some other kinds of societal norms, that some of which are still traditions, some are not. Remember that everybody or many different cultures have different burial traditions. Some, can't go past a certain amount of days. Some, um, some people want to do a cremation and then at a more convenient time or a time when all the relatives can come together, they'll do a celebration. Some people do a celebration of life. The Irish do a wake where everybody kind of parties and celebrates the life rather than crying and having sad conversations. Other people, other cultures totally believe in the funeral and the respect of all of that. Sitting Shiva is something that's important in the Jewish culture. There are different thoughts about open casket versus closed casket. So you see all these different norms, and there are many norms for many different kinds of people. So these things can become blocks in those healing conversations. So cultural, then another one is, speaking of the cultural expectations, another story from my own life. My mom comes from a Puerto Rican family. And it's very common among Hispanic families to have this belief that you don't air the family's dirty laundry out there in public. You don't tell people. You may talk to people within the family, but this is not like something you take public. And so, is it any wonder that when I got married and problems would come up in the marriage, I didn't know how to speak about my feelings. I didn't know how to talk about it. I remember going to Al-Anon at one point in my life, and everybody is there to talk about the alcoholic in their life that's causing them pain. But rather than being able to share about the painful things going on in my life, I only shared when I'd had some kind of an insight or a victory. And one day I noticed, wow, after the meeting, nobody comes over really to talk to me. But this other woman who was always sharing about her screw ups, who later, by the way, became my best friend, she always had so many people around her. And I shared that with my therapist. And he said, well, do you ever share about your screw ups? And I was like, well, no, of course not. And he said, maybe everybody's bonding through their woundedness. And maybe you feel unapproachable to them because you're never sharing about any of your pain. That was a big eye opener for me, a huge eye opener. And so Robert Bly said it well many years ago, author Robert Bly. He said, we bond through our woundedness. And so never be afraid to share your story of pain with someone else who's in pain, because sometimes that's what gives them permission to be able to share their story with you. All right, looking at other aspects that affect our ability to communicate effectively would be personal beliefs. So let's say, for example, you are a born again Christian and you have very clear ideas about what happens to somebody when they pass from this world, or you have very clear ideas about how to handle a breakup, or maybe your belief is turn to God, go right into prayer. But maybe I am a Buddhist, or I am from a tradition where beginning to chant and rock, or beginning to do qigong, or something like that is what I believe is the right thing to do. So do you see the two of us in a room trying to talk to each other? One of us trying to help the other when we have these very different personal beliefs about how things should go. I had an experience once with helping a client who was Jewish, who believed there was no afterlife. There was nothing after this. And I have to say, I grew up in a Christian home where heaven was an everyday conversation, and wanting to be there and kind of living a life that left that open as a possibility was very, very important. And so for me, it would be a conversation that would not be the easiest to be speaking to somebody who believes that's it. I die, I'm gone, game over. So if you're getting the idea of what I'm saying to you, those personal beliefs would make a difference. Another area that makes a big difference is personal life experiences. So, for example, if I believe, if I've had therapy after suffering a loss and suffering a lot of grief, and it went well, and I'm now trying to help someone who has no belief in therapy at all, there's going to be a little block in that communication, isn't there? Because what am I likely to want to suggest to them? Therapy. Or if I've found comfort in reading the Bible, and maybe they read the Quran, or maybe they believe or read the Bhagavad Gita or some other holy book, my suggesting to them reading the Bible is probably not going to be very helpful. So again, personal values. Yeah, all these things we are impact everything we do and what we bring to others when we're trying to help them or work with them. So personal values. Maybe you believe that kindness and gentleness and softness are the best way to support someone who's hurting. But maybe somebody else believes you got to say, hey, you got to go forward. You can't stay stuck here. You can't let this dictate the rest of your life. We're all different. We all have different beliefs and different ways of approaching our lives. Maybe somebody's really from that school of fall off the horse, get back up, get out there. And somebody else may be from, it's okay. Let me just hold you. Let me just help you feel safe until the day you can decide whether or not you want to re enter that experience. Well, that's two very different ideas and two very different experiences to be talking about. Other things that impact our communication could be the expectations of our peers. Maybe I'm in a certain spiritual group and my peers in that group expect me to communicate in a certain way. But I may be with somebody who doesn't relate to those ways that I'm trying to help. And so, again, problems. And then another area that I think is very important that we all really need to think about when we're trying to help someone: prior experience and trauma. If you're trying to help someone who was part of an explosion where people they loved were killed, they were maybe part of something like what the Ukraine people have been going through. Or maybe they've lived through an earthquake, as so many of us here in California have, and they have a trauma response to that earth shaking again. I actually had this happen to me at a party. I The first time I ever went to a really awful earthquake, I was alone and I was terrified. The next time I went to an earthquake, I was at a party. I think everybody was watching football, in fact. And when that earthquake started, I was just frozen in terror. My eyes were the size of saucers, and I didn't know what to do. And other people were like, "Oh, calm down, have a glass of wine. It's fine, it's fine." But what I was experiencing was a result of a past experience that was traumatic. And that happens to all of us. Trauma creates a certain response within the psyche, within the body, within the emotions. And so if somebody's way of trying to help you is like, "Oh, come on, shake it off," that's not going to work very well with you if you're somebody who's having a really extreme response. So again, we have to remember not only to say certain things, but remember who we are saying them to and whether or not the way we're saying them is going to be helpful. So we'll explore this a bit more when we come back from this quick break. Paula Shaw here. I'm thrilled that LifeWave phototherapy patches, which use no drugs or chemicals, have become a part of my life and my business. My family and I all use their wearable patch technology, and the results are life-changing. My parents in their 90s used the X39 patch, which activates stem cells, reverses aging, and improves the function of every area of the brain. I love X39 because I can work out with the 30-year-olds with no problem. And it's erased my fine lines and given my skin a youthful glow. LifeWave patches use a patented form of phototherapy, frequencies of light, to safely boost health and wellness at the cellular level. No drugs. To learn more, go to my website, lifewave.com/safe health. That's lifewave.com/safe health. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm Paula Shaw, your host, and we're talking today about saying the right thing when you don't know what to say. So we've been looking at the kinds of things that make us unique and how that uniqueness can sometimes block a helpful conversation and create fear within us as to whether or not we can do the right thing, we can say the right thing, we can actually be helpful. So, along with all the things that we have just talked about, because we're kind of looking at why are we scared? Why don't we enter into these conversations more easily? And so, besides all those things that we just looked at, there are three other major areas that we have to take into consideration when we're trying to have effective communication with somebody. And most of these principles that I'm talking about today, they're actually in place whether someone is emotionally falling apart or not. They're just really good things to keep in mind whenever you're trying to communicate with anybody, especially within relationships. I know sometimes, we women are especially prone to this one. Well, if you loved me, you'd know what I'm feeling. Well, no. Here's what I say to my clients all the time. If you don't say it in words, don't assume that someone knows what you're feeling. And so I think we all really need to look at our communication style, the origin of how we communicate, and all of these factors that we've just been discussing. The culture we come from, the values, the family, the experiences, all of those things are really important in us being able to honestly look at, am I an effective communicator, particularly when the situation is difficult? Or am I just one that needs to find another excuse not to show up because I'm not confident that I know the right way to help somebody? So, another thing that can be an important consideration is um, if the person is going through any kind of personal um, life experiences or traumas in that present moment. Past ones, of course, are important and they certainly can get in the way. But it's important to be aware of what's happening to that person right now. For example, if you were trying to help someone at the office who was being threatened that they may lose their job, it would probably be really helpful if you also knew that they were going through chemo for a cancer diagnosis that they are dealing with. It might be really important to know they're separated from their spouse and the marriage is in trouble. So, present moment life experiences and possible traumas are another really important piece that we need to look at when we're trying to be helpful. Another really important one, and this is one that not everybody is aware of, we call them limiting subconscious beliefs. So, here's what's tricky about limiting subconscious beliefs: they're subconscious, meaning underconscious. Conscious is the stuff we know right here that's present in the brain and that you're aware of. Subconscious is powerful, even more powerful, because the subconscious is like 99% of the brain functioning, 95 to 99%. And conscious is really this very small amount of the brain functioning. So let me give you an example. This happened actually with a client of mine. Um, she comes in and I said, "So, what's going on in your life that you feel like you need help with?" And she said, "I don't know. I just seem to be a magnet for every self centered, narcissistic jerk man out there." And I said, "Ah, okay. And why do you feel that way?" And so she starts reciting the experience that she's had in her last few relationships with me. And I said, "Okay, I wonder if you might be holding some subconscious beliefs that you don't deserve to be treated beautifully and respectfully by a man." And she was like, "Well, that's ridiculous. Of course, I believe I deserve to be treated respectfully and beautifully by a man." So then we used something called neuromuscular feedback or muscle testing to have her make a statement. And muscle testing, because the body can't lie. The body doesn't lie. So the bottom line of how this works is if something is truth for you or your energy field resonates with it, then when you put pressure on a muscle, whether it's holding out an arm and pushing on it or using your fingers and trying to break an O-ring, when you put that pressure there, the muscle will be able to hold strong if the answer is yes, or if you resonate with the statement that was just made. But if the answer is no, or the information does not resonate with your own biofield, and every one of us has a biofield, then the muscle will go weak. So it would look kind of like this for those of you that can see me. If I say, "My name is Paula Shaw," since that is my truth, I would be able to put a lot of pressure and try and break this O-ring that I just made with my thumb and my index finger. And I'm putting my other index finger and trying to break it, but I'm strong because it is my truth that my name is Paula Shaw. Now, if I say, "My name is Martha Washington," it broke immediately. I had no strength in the muscle because it was not my truth. So we use this technique in the field of energy psychology, of which I am a pioneer. We use that kind of thing often to discover what the limiting subconscious beliefs are, and then we can help a client neutralize those beliefs so that they are not causing negative outcome, negative believing, negative behaviors. But if you don't know how to find the limiting subconscious beliefs, or you don't have help from somebody who does, or you don't even know the concept, you might not realize that they are putting a tractor factor out there for something you don't even want. Like this woman who kept attracting men who would not treat her beautifully or respectfully because she held the belief that she didn't deserve that. That's a topic we can go into more in another time because it's fascinating and it is huge. And it's the reason why many of us are not attracting what we really want in life. We're not creating the life we really want because we don't realize that we're holding limiting beliefs that are attracting something else. And the last area I want to look at with you that can cause difficulties in a person's life and in the communication aspect of trying to support them when they're going through hard times are the genetic signatures that we inherited from our ancestors. And so here's the bottom line of what I'm saying. We don't just inherit how we look from our ancestors. We inherit the genetic signatures of how they responded to life and to life circumstances. So I'm going to give you another example from my private practice. I was working with a Jewish woman who said to me, "I don't know what it is. I'm feeling anxious all the time. I'm always worrying that the police are going to come and take one of us away. And I never feel safe." And so I said to her, um, "Were you a child of parents who were in the Holocaust, who lived through all of what went on in that awful, awful period of history?" And she was. So not only was she being impacted on a subconscious on a subconscious level with the limiting beliefs we just talked about, but on a genetic level, she had inherited the way her family responded to the nightmare they were living through. the fear, the anxiety, that pervasive kind of dark cloud feeling that was always hanging over her head. And once we acknowledged that, then we were able to use some energy methods to disconnect her from those genetic signatures so that she could kind of give them back to the ancestors, to the people who had experienced them, and then be able to form her own appropriate responses to the things that were going on in her own life. So, those three areas are very important when we're trying to have important conversations. If we really want to understand the people that we're trying to help, if we really want to support them and be non-judgmental and compassionate and helpful, then we need to understand who they are and what they've experienced in both the acculturation they went through in their lives, the beliefs, the family. All of those pieces come together to make us who we are and influence how we experience whatever life brings to us. So we're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to answer some questions that have come to us from emails and from chat during this show. We will be right back.
For those looking to improve their lives, there's nobody better to turn to than Paula Shaw. Paula helps people regain successful lives by identifying and eliminating self-sabotaging behavior using a multitude of mind-body techniques to identify and resolve their core issues. Working with a wide variety of healing modalities, she provides her clients with the most effective process for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. Now we're going to take some time to do something that I think will be very interesting, and that is address some of the issues that are coming up from people while we have been talking about the things we're talking about on this show. So my producer, Amy Scruggs, my producer and dear friend, has agreed to help us by reading some of the questions, and then I'm going to try to answer them right here, right now. Amy?
Yes, Paula, we have a first question here that came in, and it's when you first get the news that something tragic or painful has happened to someone you care about, what is the best thing to do?
Ooh, good question. Good question. You know, I think a lot of people are mixed up about this because it feels like you should go into action, right? You know, like I don't know, get them something or buy them food or whatever. But here's the most important thing to remember, because it's when you first find out something tragic's just happened, that can be the biggest moment of panic for the helper, because you know this terrible thing's happen and you have no idea how to be helpful. So what I really want to say is the first thing you need to do is not turn to your intellect and your database. Turn to your heart and your humanity. That's what a hurting person needs. Your humanity, not your database. So think about what they might be feeling. Think about how you would feel if this happened to you, and come from that place. And I'm telling you, even if all you can say to them is, I am so sorry you're going through this. I can't imagine what you're feeling. And hug them or just sit quietly there with them. That would be so much more helpful than somebody saying, well, you know, other people have been through this too. You'll get through it. Everybody does. Or, you know, that kind of intellectual thing may be true, but it's not helpful. It's more helpful to just say, how awful. Oh my God, my heart aches for you. Do you see? That's coming from a feeling place, not a thinking intellectual place. Okay, Amy, we have another.
We do. This is a good one too, Paula. If someone is in the anger stage, should you try to calm them down and shift them to forgiveness or let them rant and carry on?
Ooh, I love this one because it's going to let me rant a little bit. Okay. One of the things I am passionate about teaching people is there are no 5 stages of grief. That is misinformation that got misunderstood many years ago when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book about the 5 stages of death and dying. Denial, anger, bargaining, all of these, the 5 stages she talks about are the experiences that can be very common for a person who finds out they are dying, but not common necessarily for the person left behind, for the grieving person. So that's the first thing I want to say. No 5 stages, because I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to my office and say, I just can't get angry. I can't find the anger, and I know if I don't go through that, I can't heal. That's the thing. People think they have to go through each of those stages. What I will say is there are dimensions, there are common experiences. Shock, denial, numbness, that's often an initial dimension people go through. But there may be somebody who just leaps right to anger or to fear. And so there's not a set progression, and there are not 5 stages. There are dimensions, and the dimensions are very, very common. And I am happy if any of you watching this show want to send an email to us here at Change It Up Radio. I would be happy to send you a document that I created on those different dimensions. Or if any of you have my grief book or are interested in getting it, there is a book called Grief: When Will This Pain Ever End? That has so many good processes and articles and lots of helpful pieces. And what's particularly great, I think, about it is grieving people can barely think straight. They can't focus on reading 300 pages. So the way I wrote this book, the chapters are very short, and then they're followed by tools, processes, small articles that can be very helpful to help move you through the grief so you don't get stuck in it. But the other thing I want to say about that question, Amy, the idea that should you help calm them down and move them through it, or move them to forgiveness. If you're trying to change what a grieving person is experiencing, you are stating either in a subtle or a very blatant way that how they're being is not okay. It's a judgment. And trust me, the last thing a grieving person needs is judgment. It's not a good idea to tell them how they should be acting, feeling, or responding in that agonizing moment of pain. Let them do whatever feels natural to them, whether you agree with it or not. Just be there to support and to have compassion. That's what they need most. Don't teach, don't preach, don't try to move them into what you think is a more proper behavior. Just accept them and love them and support them. Amy, I'm not sure if we have time for one more.
Well, we do have another. So if you want to at least touch on this, and maybe the rest can wait for the next episode. The
Okay.
next question is important because it's, when should you try to have a helpful conversation with someone
Uh,
in pain?
mm, yeah, this will be a great one to end our show with. First of all, remember, pain and emotion are not going on in the intellect. You have a left side of your brain, that's the intellectual side, and the right side of your brain is the emotional side. If the right side is all busy and lots is going on, you can't get through to the left side. Having an intellectual or a logical conversation needs to wait. But a helpful conversation, if it's more like, could you use a hug? Is there any way I can support you? I'm so sorry you're going through this pain. Something simple like that, that offers them the opportunity to express what they're experiencing without any judgment or criticism, but also just to have that support from you without being judged. And you know what sometimes is the best thing? To just say, we don't have to talk, but I'm here. I just want to be here for you if you need me. I heard this beautiful story on a podcast once where a man had lost his teenage daughter. He was in agony, and his friend showed up with a bag of groceries, and he said, you don't have to let me in, and we don't have to talk. I just want you to know I'll be sitting right out here on your porch if you need me. And he sat out there all day. And his friend said that was the most healing thing that happened to him, dealing with that loss. So I think on that note, we will end today's episode. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for being willing to learn the skills that can help us all support each other through whatever life brings us. Because one thing we know for sure, change is coming. And if we can help each other work through it, what a much better world it'll be. So next week, we will finish this up. We will continue learning not only what are the right kinds of things to say, but how to say them. And next week, we'll look at the 5 steps of a successful healing conversation. All right. Look forward to seeing you then. Until then, take good care. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining me on Change It Up Radio. I hope you found this episode informative and entertaining. If you want to hear past shows or you want to get information on being a guest or a sponsor of this show, go to changeitupradio.com. We all know that change is inevitable and it's necessary, but darn it, it's also tricky. My goal is to help you make the experience of change smoother and more productive. If you've benefited from this show, please subscribe to it, share it, and review it. That helps me to tune into what you really want to hear and what you really want to learn more about. Remember, you can find us on every major podcast platform and also on YouTube, Facebook, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. We look forward to seeing you next week for Change It Up Radio.